The moment you stopped running, they started noticing. That's the invisible line where respect begins. Avoidants are wired to respond to distance, calm, and self possession, not to desperation or constant pursuit. When you chase, when you beg, when you adjust yourself to fit the rhythm of their absence, you unknowingly feed the very pattern that keeps them distant. They notice your presence when it's unwavering, but notice your absence when it's not desperate. That moment you decide to walk without panic, to live your life fully without making their attention a requirement, you step into a type of power that is unmistakable to an avoidant. They can sense it instinctively. It's not about control or manipulation. It's about showing that your world does not revolve around their availability, that your happiness is not contingent on their engagement, and that your self-worth exists independently of their recognition. Avoidants are drawn to what they cannot control, and they respect what they cannot manipulate. When you stop chasing, you stop giving them the safety of predictable validation. That absence, calm, deliberate, and unpanicked, forces them into a rare state of awareness. They begin to notice your routines, your laughter, your lightness, your consistency in living life on your own terms. Suddenly, they are confronted with a truth they rarely face. You are a person of value, whether they show up or not. That realization stirs something inside them: curiosity, respect, and yes, even longing. But most importantly, it awakens the understanding that you are not optional. Chasing communicates a hidden message that your love, your attention, and your presence can be earned or begged for. Walking without chase communicates a completely opposite message: that your love, your attention, and your presence are conscious choices, freely given, never contingent upon their availability or approval. Avoidants do not often verbalize admiration, but they feel it. The respect they hold for someone who can disengage without panic is profound because it mirrors something they rarely allow themselves: autonomy, clarity, and emotional resilience. When you choose not to chase, you reveal that you have standards that cannot be negotiated or dismissed, and that type of self-possession is magnetic to someone who is naturally wired to flee from dependency. It's not about withdrawing as a tactic, although to the untrained eye, it may appear that way. It's about holding your own space in a way that refuses to shrink, contort, or inflate yourself to satisfy their rhythms of avoidance. You do not inflate your emotions to provoke interest. You do not chase after texts, dates, or fleeting moments of connection. You exist fully within your own boundaries, unshaken by their temporary unavailability. Avoidants are deeply attuned to these subtle distinctions. They respect the person who can remain grounded while they flit between closeness and distance, because that steadiness forces them to face themselves. They may try to hide it with humor, distance, or even silence, but internally, that respect is registering. The beauty of not chasing is that it creates a psychological rarity. Most people do chase, they call, message, seek reassurance, and bend themselves to fill the gaps left by an avoidant. But when someone refuses to follow that pattern, when someone walks without panic and communicates through presence instead of desperation, it breaks the predictable dynamic. Avoidants notice the anomaly immediately. They notice the person who doesn't wait for them to define the pace, who doesn't turn absence into an emotional emergency, who doesn't inflate their longing to make themselves seen. That respect grows quietly, invisibly, but it is solid and lasting because it is rooted in authenticity rather than reaction. It is also important to understand why this works so powerfully. Avoidants are naturally wired to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm. They equate neediness with threat, pressure with confinement, and dependency with loss of freedom. By choosing not to chase, you are not just asserting your self-worth, you are creating a safe paradox for them. You are showing that closeness is available, but only on terms that do not compromise either of yourselves. That paradox is fascinating to them. It is rare to encounter someone who loves themselves enough to be present, but free enough to leave. That combination is unforgettable. That combination breeds respect that runs deeper than affection or desire. At its core, not chasing is not about punishing the avoidant or playing games. It's about modeling emotional sovereignty. You demonstrate that your inner world is whole, that your energy is not tied to their responsiveness, and that your sense of self does not shrink to fit the gaps left by another. Avoidants are drawn to this not because it strokes their ego, but because it forces a reflection. They are confronted with a version of connection that is not about anxiety or pursuit, a version of relationship where integrity and self-possession come first. That realization creates an undeniable respect that lingers, whether they admit it or not. Finally, the most powerful aspect of this truth is its simplicity. Stop chasing, live your life. Hold your boundaries. Walk without panic. Avoidants may not say it aloud, but internally, they register every moment you choose yourself over the need to be seen. That choice is unforgettable. That choice is magnetic, and that choice, quiet, deliberate, unshakable, is why they respect you, often more than anyone else ever will. You didn't bend to make them comfortable, and that terrified them. That's the invisible truth that avoidants rarely admit, but always feel. Avoidants are naturally attuned to patterns of control and compliance. They are drawn to flexibility, but often fear it because it exposes them to accountability. When you keep your boundaries, you do something rare. You show them a version of love and connection that is unyielding yet non-aggressive. It's a form of respect for yourself that cannot be negotiated, and it lands in a way that is both intimidating and magnetic. Avoidance may respond with distance, subtle tests, or even irritation, but internally, they are taking note. Boundaries are mirrors, and in your reflection, they see the parts of themselves. They often avoid responsibility, consistency, and emotional integrity. That reflection is uncomfortable, but that discomfort breeds respect. Most people approach relationships with a subtle urgency. They adjust, they negotiate, they compromise until the edges of their identity blur. Avoidants are experts at reading those compromises because they reveal dependence, fear, or emotional instability. When you refuse to compromise your boundaries, you are saying something radical without words. I will not erase myself to make you comfortable. That statement is a quiet rebellion against the usual dynamic. Avoidants notice because it breaks the script they are used to. Someone pliable, someone who shifts for them, someone whose presence can be easily managed. By holding your ground, you are communicating that your value is inherent and not up for debate. That is a rare energy for an avoidant to encounter, and it triggers a deep, often unspoken respect. Boundaries are not just about rules or restrictions, they are about clarity of self and emotional sovereignty. They tell the avoidant that your love, your attention, and your presence come with conditions, not conditions to appease them, but conditions that honor your well-being, your needs, and your sense of self. That clarity is magnetic because it models something they rarely see in themselves. The courage to stand firm without needing to justify every action, every feeling, every limit. Avoidants are wired to detect insecurity and codependency. When someone maintains boundaries, it signals strength, self-possession, and autonomy, qualities that avoidants cannot help but admire. The power of boundaries lies in their quiet authority. You do not need to lecture, manipulate, or demand recognition. Your boundaries speak for themselves. The way you respond to calls, texts, or invitations, without sacrificing your comfort or priorities, communicates an unspoken truth. You are the architect of your own life, not a satellite orbiting theirs. Avoidants notice patterns like these, even if they never articulate them. Every firm, consistent, and unapologetic boundary becomes a subtle lesson in accountability and self-respect, forcing them to reflect on their own patterns of avoidance. That reflection is rarely comfortable, which is exactly why it is so powerful. Avoidants are not wired to handle emotional aggression or confrontation well, but they are wired to respect integrity and clarity. Keeping your boundaries is a way of demonstrating both without overt conflict. You are showing them that connection does not require surrender, that intimacy does not require compromise of self, and that love does not require self-erasure. That is terrifying for someone whose default pattern is to flee from intensity or responsibility, because it exposes the gap between their behavior and the behavior they admire. But terror in this sense is not fear of you, it is fear of what you represent, the standard you embody simply by being consistent and whole. It's also important to understand the subtle psychology at play. Avoidance respect what they cannot manipulate. Boundaries, when held firmly and calmly, are unmanipulable. They are not threats. They are truth made visible. The avoidant may test them, push against them, or attempt to provoke a reaction, but when you remain steady, you teach a rare lesson that respect, safety, and presence can exist without submission. This lesson is both simple and revolutionary. It shows them that relationships do not have to follow the old script of pursuit, withdrawal, compromise, and anxiety. You are showing them a different way, and in that demonstration, they develop a quiet admiration, whether they admit it or not. Holding boundaries also forces avoidants to face their own avoidance in a way they cannot ignore. Every time they encounter your limits, they are reminded that freedom and intimacy are not opposites, that accountability is not punishment, and that respect cannot be faked or forced. That tension, discomfort, coupled with admiration, is where deep respect is born. Avoidance may initially resist it, may rationalize, or may even push back. But internally, the energy you hold creates a lasting imprint. They remember the person who did not bend, who did not beg, and who did not compromise self-worth for their comfort. That memory becomes a standard against which they unconsciously measure others. Finally, the most profound effect of keeping your boundaries is that it preserves your own integrity while silently shaping theirs. Avoidants respect people who are whole, self-contained, and unflinching because it forces reflection without confrontation, teaching without preaching. By refusing to compromise your self-respect, you are doing something rare. You are modeling a form of love and connection that is safe, sovereign, and magnetic, all at once. That is why avoidants respect you. Not because you changed them, not because you proved anything, but because you stood firm and showed them what authenticity looks like. In the end, boundaries are not just rules, they are declarations of self-worth. You are saying without aggression, without drama, and without compromise, this is who I am, this is what I value, and this is how I move through the world. Avoidance may not articulate it, but that declaration resonates on a deep, almost instinctual level. They may test you, they may distance themselves, they may even try to provoke doubt, but the respect is always there. Quietly growing, silently marking the space you hold as one of authentic power and magnetic presence. You didn't vanish, but you didn't orbit them either. That one line captures the subtle but profound difference that avoidants notice immediately. There's a fine line between disappearing completely and being endlessly available, and few people dang it successfully. Avoidants are drawn to people who are reliable, yet not overinvested, who show up consistently but do not wait for validation from their presence. Being consistent without over-availability is one of the rarest forms of attraction because it communicates self-possession, calm confidence, and emotional independence all at once. It's not manipulation, it's not strategy, it's simply living life with steadiness and integrity while maintaining boundaries that honor your energy. Avoidants have a natural sensitivity to emotional intensity, especially when it comes from someone who hovers, chases, or inflates their feelings. Overavailability often triggers anxiety or disengagement because it unconsciously mirrors the patterns they try to escape: pressure, neediness, or imbalance. By being consistent without orbiting, you create a different rhythm entirely. Your attention is steady, but not intrusive. Your presence is felt without being demanded. Your connection exists without dependence on their engagement. Avoidants notice this difference immediately. Because it challenges their default patterns, they see someone who can hold space without suffocating, love without clinging, and exist without requiring approval. Consistency without over-availability is magnetic because it models something avoidants often avoid in themselves: reliability paired with autonomy. They respect it because it reflects emotional maturity and groundedness. While many people demonstrate care by reacting to every text, call, or signal, you demonstrate care by being present in life, but not tethered to their reactions. That creates a subtle tension, a paradox of availability that is neither overwhelming nor absent. This paradox triggers awareness in avoidance. Suddenly, they see someone who is capable of connection on terms that do not compromise personal freedom or self-respect. That awareness is the first spark of attachment because it's rooted not in need, but in calm steadiness. It's important to understand that consistency here is not about control or strategy. It's about internal stability and external clarity. Avoidance can sense desperation from miles away, and desperation destroys respect. Consistency without over-availability, however, communicates that your life has gravity, structure, and purpose outside of them. You don't need their presence to validate your worth, yet you choose to engage meaningfully when appropriate. That combination is rare and unforgettable. Avoidants are wired to recognize it on a subconscious level. Your steady, grounded presence communicates that you are someone they cannot easily manipulate, predict, or destabilize. And that very resistance is the magnet that draws respect. Reliability also fosters trust in a way that avoidants rarely encounter. They are used to unpredictability, people who either vanish completely or try too hard to fill every gap in their life. By being consistent without orbiting, you show them a model of balanced connection, someone who is trustworthy, emotionally mature, and respectful of boundaries. That modeling quietly educates them on a different standard of interaction. It's not something they immediately vocalize, but internally, they register the difference. Every interaction reinforces a sense of safety and stability, yet it does not demand dependence or surrender. Avoidants notice that your calmness is not fragile, that your attachment is not reactive, and that your attention is a gift, not a requirement. Avoidants also respect the predictability of consistency without the suffocation of availability, because it mirrors a rare internal alignment. They recognize that your energy is measured, deliberate, and self-contained. You do not inflate your presence to gain attention, nor do you withdraw entirely out of fear. Instead, you occupy a middle space of emotional equilibrium, present when it matters, distant when it matters, consistent when it counts. That steadiness forces them to pause and reflect. It awakens awareness because it is so different from the usual pattern of imbalance they encounter in relationships. That awareness, in turn, triggers attachment because humans naturally gravitate toward reliability and safety, even when their fear response urges them to flee. Another key aspect is the subtle way consistency communicates non-reactive power. You respond on your terms, you engage on your terms, and you live on your terms. Avoidance cannot predict when or how you will show up because your behavior is rooted in internal sovereignty, not their expectations. That unpredictability within stability is profoundly magnetic. They respect that your emotional availability is earned through respect for self, not granted through anxiety or obligation. That respect grows silently over time, not because you chased or pressured, but because you consistently modeled calm, grounded presence in the face of their avoidance. Finally, the combination of consistency and non-over-availability is transformational. Avoidants often think they value independence and freedom, yet they rarely encounter someone who embodies both connection and autonomy simultaneously. By being steady without orbiting, you show them a form of intimacy they rarely experience, one that is anchored in integrity rather than need, calm rather than chaos, and deliberate rather than reactive. That pattern imprints deeply. They may not articulate it, they may resist it initially, but the respect it generates is real and lasting. Your calm, measured presence communicates more than words ever could. It tells them quietly but undeniably that you are someone who cannot be chased or controlled, only respected and cherished. In the end, being consistent without over-availability is one of the most understated yet potent ways to cultivate respect with an avoidant. You are not trying to manipulate or provoke. You are not withdrawing as attacked. You are simply living your life, holding your ground, and offering presence without pressure. Avoidants notice this because it is rare. They respect it because it reflects strength and self-possession. They secretly admire, and they remember it because it leaves an indelible mark of calm authority and unwavering authenticity, a mark that most avoidants never forget. You didn't say what they wanted, you said what was true. That's the quiet line that sets you apart in the eyes of an avoidant. Avoidants are deeply attuned to honesty that is rooted in self-respect rather than manipulation. They notice when someone communicates without performing, without bending for approval, and without inflating emotions to elicit a desired reaction. Standing in your truth is not about confrontation or argument. It's about clarity, integrity, and emotional sovereignty. It's a power move, not because it forces them to respond a certain way, but because it communicates that your inner world is whole, unshakable, and non-negotiable. Many people tailor their words to please or pacify. They soften their boundaries, water down their feelings, or say what they think the other person wants to hear. Avoidance see through this almost instantly. They recognize that trying to please them is a form of submission, and they respect those who refuse to surrender to emotional convenience. When you speak your truth, even when it challenges them, it communicates something profoundly magnetic. You will not erase yourself for their comfort. That energy sticks. It lingers long after the conversation is over because it is rare, honest, and unflinching. A standing in your truth also forces avoidance to reflect. Avoidants often avoid accountability and uncomfortable feelings. They tend to deflect, minimize, or rationalize behaviors that reveal their patterns of avoidance. When you speak truthfully, calmly, and unapologetically, you hold up a mirror. That mirror shows them their own avoidance, their emotional gaps, and the consequences of their behavior. It's uncomfortable, but that discomfort creates respect. Avoidants are wired to admire clarity and integrity even when it unsettles them. Your refusal to manipulate or bend for approval communicates a standard they rarely encounter, a person who is fully themselves without apology. It's critical to understand that honesty in this context is not about aggression or drama. You are not pointing fingers or shaming. You are simply expressing what is real, what you feel, and what you need. That distinction matters. Avoidants often react defensively when they sense criticism or blame, but they resonate deeply with authenticity that is steady, calm, and firm. Saying your truth is like planting a seed of awareness. It does not demand immediate action or reaction, but over time, it grows into recognition and admiration. They notice the courage it takes to communicate without collapsing or inflating, and that courage is magnetic. Avoidants respect boundaries, but they admire integrity even more. Standing in your truth is the ultimate expression of integrity because it ties words to values, presence to intention, and communication to self-respect. By refusing to lie, sugarcoat, or manipulate for comfort, you demonstrate that your world is anchored in reality rather than reaction. Avoidance may initially test you, try to provoke a softened response, or even attempt to dismiss what you've said, but your consistent truthfulness creates a lasting impression. They remember the person who was brave enough to speak without compromise, because few people ever do. Another reason this principle is so powerful is that it prevents self-erasure, which is often what avoidants unconsciously fear or push for. They gravitate toward people who shrink themselves to accommodate emotional distance because it is predictable and non-threatening. But when you stand in your truth, you refuse that pattern, you are visible, unapologetic, and fully present, and that visibility challenges the avoidance. It's simultaneously intimidating and magnetic because it is a behavior they cannot manipulate, ignore, or take for granted. That authenticity sticks in their memory precisely because it is uncommon, steady, and non-negotiable. Avoidants also respect honesty. That does not plead. There is a subtle but profound difference between pleading to be understood and sharing your truth with calm certainty. Pleading communicates neediness and dependence. It signals that your emotional state is contingent on their response. Speaking your truth communicates independence and self-possession. Avoidants notice that you are not trying to provoke a reaction, nor are you seeking validation. They are confronted with someone who communicates from self-assurance rather than fear. That is magnetic. That is rare. And it is exactly the kind of energy that sticks with them long after any interaction. Finally, standing in your truth cultivates a unique form of respect that is quiet, internal, and enduring. Avoidants may not immediately say, "I respect you," but internally they are registering something they cannot deny. In your words, your presence, and your unwavering honesty communicate that you are someone whose attention, affection, and engagement are conscious choices, never reactions to manipulation or fear. That combination, truth without pleading, presence without desperation, integrity without aggression, is unforgettable. Avoidants remember it because it contrasts sharply with the people who chase, bend, or inflate themselves for approval. In the end, standing in your truth is not about changing them. It's about showing up fully as yourself, with clarity, consistency, and courage. That is why avoidants respect you, not because you provoked them, not because you earned their attention, but because you demonstrated a type of integrity that is rare, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. You did not say what they wanted to hear. You said what was true, and that is a memory, a standard, and a quiet power they carry long after you walk away. The moment you left quietly, they couldn't stop thinking about you. That line captures a truth. Avoidance rarely admit, but always feel. Walking away is not about punishment, manipulation, or proving a point. It is about choosing yourself over chaos, dignity over desperation, and clarity over attachment to what cannot serve you. Avoidants have a complicated relationship with departures. They fear them, they test them, they rationalize them, but they never forget a departure that carries calmness, integrity, and absence of drama. Walking without resentment is rare, and that rarity is magnetic. Most people leave with emotion attached, anger, hurt, or pleading that leaves the door open for negotiation. Avoidants are wired to detect emotional volatility, and when that accompanies a departure, it becomes predictable, manageable, and ultimately forgettable. But when you walk without resentment, without over-explaining, and without trying to elicit guilt, you create something entirely different. A presence that leaves an impression precisely because it is not trying to leave one. Avoidants notice this immediately. The quiet confidence of a calm exit forces them to reckon with your value without you needing to argue for it. It is a demonstration of self-respect that cannot be ignored. Walking away without resentment communicates a profound internal message. You are whole without them, and your attachment is not desperate. Avoidants are drawn to independence, but they are often uncomfortable when faced with it fully realized in another person. The calm, non-reactive exit forces them to confront something they usually avoid, the reality that connection does not require compromise of self. That confrontation is uncomfortable, yes, but it creates a deep, silent respect that lingers far longer than words, explanations, or drama ever could. The power of leaving without resentment lies in its unspoken authority. You are not trying to change them, you are not trying to punish them, and you are not trying to manipulate their feelings. Instead, you are demonstrating a principle that is magnetic to avoidance, self-possession in action. Your actions communicate clearly that your life, your peace, and your energy are not contingent upon their decisions or attention. That clarity is almost impossible for an avoidant to ignore. It leaves them thinking, not out of guilt, but out of recognition. They recognize that your value exists independently of their engagement. And that realization is unforgettable. Avoidants are wired to admire strength and calmness, even when it unsettles them. By walking quietly and without resentment, you create a form of tension that they cannot easily diffuse. You leave without drama, yet your absence volume. That absence is a mirror. It shows them what consistency, integrity, and self-respect look like in motion. They remember it because it is rare. Few people walk away without emotional theatrics, and even fewer do it without collapsing or pleading. Your ability to do so demonstrates emotional sovereignty, which is magnetic and impossible for an avoidant to dismiss. Walking without resentment also demonstrates emotional closure. Avoidants often resist introspection or accountability, and they are uncomfortable with people who cling or demand resolution. By leaving calmly, you demonstrate that closure does not require their input or validation. You model how to detach without drama, how to honor self without inflating conflict, and how to move forward with dignity intact. That modeling leaves a profound impression because it creates a contrast with every other interaction they've experienced, a contrast they notice even if silently. Another reason this resonates so deeply is that walking without resentment signals freedom and independence combined with calm integrity. Avoidance may initially respond with surprise, denial, or even attempts to pull you back, but the quietness of your departure lingers in their mind far more than any argument ever could. They begin to reflect, not because you demanded it, but because your behavior speaks to a standard they rarely encounter: calm, consistent, principled self-respect. That reflection is internal, toll, and enduring. Finally, walking without resentment imprints because it is a rare form of power that avoids emotional theatrics. Avoidants are wired to respect self-possession more than affection, drama, or pleading. By leaving quietly, you communicate that your attachment was intentional, your presence valuable, and your exit dignified. You do not need to explain, justify, or dramatize anything. They cannot forget the person who left with calmness instead of chaos, who walked with integrity instead of desperation. That quiet strength is remembered long after absence begins, forming a deep internal respect that often surpasses attraction or desire. In the end, Walking without resentment is not about them, it is about you owning your value, preserving your peace, and modeling a level of self respect. Few experience avoidance may not immediately admit it, but that calm, dignified departure sticks in their memory because it communicates strength, clarity, and independence in a way words never could. The moment you leave quietly, you are no longer chasing their attention. You are simply unforgettable.
You didn't save them, you showed them the mirror.
So one line captures the subtle power of refusing to fix an avoidant. Avoidants are wired to push people away when they sense pressure, expectations, or attempts at emotional repair. They run from dependency, from intensity, and from anyone who tries to heal what they themselves haven't yet confronted. But when you refuse to fix them, when you step back and simply hold your integrity and boundaries, you do something rare. You show them what accountability and self respect look like in real time. That silent stance communicates strength, stability, and self possession in a way they cannot ignore, even if they try. Most people approach avoidance with the urge to repair or rescue, trying to fill the gaps left by their patterns of avoidance. They chase, persuade, and compromise themselves to keep the connection alive. Avoidance can feel this instantly. It communicates neediness, dependence, or desperation, which triggers their instinct to flee. But when you refuse to fix them, you reverse that dynamic entirely. You are no longer a source of anxiety or obligation. You are a mirror reflecting their behavior back at them. You hold up a calm, unshakable presence that says, this is what integrity looks like. This is what self respect looks like. I cannot shrink to accommodate patterns that do not serve both of us. Avoidance may initially respond with distance, testing, or even withdrawal. That is natural. Their first impulse is always flight when confronted with someone who refuses to bend, soothe, or manage their absence. But deep down, they never forget the person who stood firm. Refusing to fix them teaches a subtle but powerful lesson. Connection does not require surrender. Respect does not require begging. Presence does not require compromise. And love does not require erasure of avoidance. May not articulate it, but they register it instinctively because it contrasts sharply with every interaction where someone has chased or accommodated them in ways that are predictable and controllable. This behavior is magnetic because it forces self-reflection without confrontation. You are not confronting them aggressively, nor are you shaming or blaming. You are simply being present as your authentic, whole self, refusing to inflate or compensate for what they cannot yet give. That presence is uncomfortable for them at first, but that discomfort is the birthplace of respect. It shows them a standard they rarely see, someone whose value exists independently of their patterns, someone who cannot be swayed by drama or absence, and someone who refuses to become a caretaker for emotional gaps that aren't theirs to fill. Ultimately, refusing to fix an avoidant is a quiet power move. It says without words, I will not erase myself for you. I will not compromise my integrity for your comfort. I will not carry your patterns for you. Avoidants notice this, even if silently. That respect is real, enduring, and profound because it is earned through self-possession, consistency, and unshakable boundaries. By refusing to fix them, you leave a lasting impression that is unforgettable. The person who did not chase, did not beg, and did not compromise their truth.